Welcome to the Built for More podcast. This is for the woman who wants to get the most out of herself in fitness, business, and in life. So if you want to learn the skills, the strategy, and the mindset to get the most out of your body, your mind, and your business, you're in the right place. Welcome back to the Built for More podcast. If you listened to the last episode with Jacinta, you'll already know that she is a naturopath specializing in women's reproductive health and skin. In the last episode, we went into PCOS and infertility, and today we're going to dive into her other specialty area, which is skin health. I see a lot of women in the fitness space who are objectively healthy. They are lean, fit, disciplined, and eating well, but are still struggling with bad skin. The reality is what looks healthy on the outside isn't always supporting what's happening internally. So today, we're going to unpack the real reasons behind adult acne, breakouts, and other skin conditions, and why fixing your skin often has very little to do with your skincare routine. So welcome back, Jacinta.
Thank you. There's so much stuff today that we're going to unpack. I was like, just thinking about things before we got here. I was like, oh my God, there's too many things I could say. I don't know if we can squish into an hour, but we'll try to do what we can.
I know. I truly think we could talk for hours. But I know that you specialize so much in skin at your clinic and you've really made that a big focus, and you actually educate other naturopaths in this space now as well, which is really cool. It's obviously something you're super passionate about. So I want to firstly ask you, what actually made you interested in this space specifically?
So when I was younger, the first episode you heard all about my period stuff. Now you hear all about my skin stuff. So when I was younger, I had psoriasis on my hands. I actually only had it on 2 fingers, which is not common for what you hear. But I actually couldn't use my right hand that much from when I was young, because with psoriasis, you form like a huge plaque. So my thumb was just completely just plaqued over, basically. And that then, I was able to actually treat that. I used medical interventions when I was young. I used a lot of topical steroids because I didn't know better from when I was grade 3. And then when I was 15 was when I started to slowly change my diet, and it significantly improved. Then I had a few kind of relapses with my skin in my early 20s when I worked a little bit more hospitality. And then I haven't had a flare of it for probably 8 to 10 years now. So first I was interested because of my own personal history. My brothers both have severe eczema and psoriasis. And then before I started Orenda, I worked for a supplement company and I was in sales and education. And with that, I had to go around and educate a lot of different skin therapists in Melbourne and in South Australia as well around fish oils and how omega-3s helped the skin. And a huge thing that I noticed that was a gap in the market was they were doing all the topicals, but they weren't getting complete long-lasting results with their clients because there was a huge gap of the internals that were being missing. And every single time I went into their clinics, they would just soak up as much information as I could give them on the internal health and how it's impacting their client's skin. And then from there, my brain just sparked my personal interest and passion in skin, plus this huge gap in the market. And I was ready to get into clinical practice. And then I started Orenda.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's so common as well. Our personal experiences and history does tend to impact what we end up being really interested in and what we end up specializing in. With your PCOS that we spoke about in the last episode, did you get quite a bit of acne with that, or was that not really a symptom?
No, I didn't. When you look back at my photos from my early 20s to mid 20s, I always had a recurring pimple right in the middle of my forehead. Just a couple always there. But I wasn't the classic case of, got my period and all of a sudden got this severe jawline cystic acne. It wasn't so much an issue. And I wonder part of it if it was because when I was 15, like I said, that was actually when I had started to learn about nutrition from that age, and I changed a lot of my diet. So I was already conscious of certain things. Definitely a different diet from then to what I know now as being healthy. But yeah, I didn't get the acne component, but I definitely see the connection between if I were to eat a little bit different, what happens with my skin. So I also wonder if my skin would have been really different if lifestyle choices
Yeah,
also a factor.
100%. This is jumping around a little bit, but because I know you mentioned that you did get into the whole natural, more holistic side of health from such a young age, was your mum really into that? Like, how
Not
did
at
you?
all. Oh, actually, I lie. So mum wasn't into it in the sense of like diet, lifestyle and stuff like that, but she would always do Reiki on us when we were younger. So she was a lot more of like the spiritual kind of element. And, you know, she tells us now that when we were younger, she'd be like, Jacinta, do you want Panadol or do you want Reiki? And then it would be like a decision of like what we would want. So for her, that was always her thing. She was always into like essential oils and things like that. So it wasn't so much because of what my parents had taught me in terms of like, this is how you eat well and this is how you move your body. I think it was more just mum's perception on medical intervention versus like holistic approach. So she would always take us to naturopaths when we were younger if there was anything going on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think as well with those like more alternative therapies, it just makes you realize being exposed to that, oh, there is actually other options out there to explore.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So why do you think it is that so many adult women, particularly in the fitness space, like people that are objectively doing the right thing, why are they struggling with acne?
Yeah. So I'll go through what actually is acne, because when we understand what acne is, then we can actually understand, well, what are the different triggers of it? So acne is essentially defined as an infection of the pilosebaceous unit. There's three main causes that can impact that. One is retention keratosis, which is where your skin cells essentially don't exfoliate themselves and they accumulate, in very layman's terms, they accumulate on top of each other. And that's where you then get people say that they want to exfoliate because they're trying to get rid of that excess buildup of keratinocytes on the skin. So one, that creates an environment that there's a blockage of oxygen into the hair follicle. So that's one key component, is that retention keratosis, so the cells accumulating on top of each other. That can happen because of things like essential fatty acid deficiency, so not enough omega-3, not enough vitamin A can impact that, stress can impact that, topical products can impact that, and thyroid. Did I say thyroid?
No.
Thyroid function can also impact that as well. We then have hypersebum secretion, which is where you then produce too much sebum. And because if you've got this excess sebum that's being produced underneath the skin, you've got these excess skin cells that are sitting on the surface. The oil has nowhere to go. It's getting stuck, congested, you get a breakout.
And sebum is essentially oil, right?
Yeah. And that hypersebum secretion can come from, excess hormone production like testosterone, DHEA, insufficiencies of progesterone or too much progesterone or imbalances between estrogen. Any hormonal imbalance sometimes can contribute to some level of hypersebum secretion. Excess cortisol can impact that. High histamine can also impact that too. And then finally, that third cause of acne is the pH balance of the skin, which is actually mostly to do with topical products that they're using, and that changes the microbiome of the skin. So coming back to that question, like why someone that leads a healthy lifestyle can then have acne. Well, first we've got to look at their topical products that they're using, which is not my area, but I know people like have collaborative clinics that we work with that I would say you need your skincare assessed. Also then looking at the makeup that they're using, if it is comedogenic or non-comedogenic, which means it's blocking the hair follicle and stopping that oil flow into the oxygen flow into the skin or not. And then we also need to consider those things that are impacting that hypersebum secretion. They could be leading a really healthy lifestyle in the sense that they're lean, they're active, they're hitting their macros, but what foods are they actually eating to hit those macros? Are they still causing blood sugar issues that's dysregulating their testosterone and their DHEA that's impacting oil production? Or is all of this actually making them excessively stressed and then they've got this high cortisol output and that's triggering an excess oil flow within the skin? So you're always still doing the same or similar workup and not just assuming because someone is fit, their BMI is within range, that they're exercising well and that they're hitting their macros, that the quality of the food that they're eating is actually sufficient enough to meet the demands for their skin.
Yeah, I do think our diet and our internal health plays such a big role in our skin. And I think that's what we really want to unpack today, is that it's a lot less about those topical products. And in a lot of cases, like you've just said, it can actually create worse symptoms, right? Or it can exacerbate them. I'd love to know, just out of curiosity, like as someone that I've never really had any struggles with my skin or acne, which I feel very blessed to be able to say. But I've definitely had periods where I haven't necessarily eaten very well or treated my body very well, and I wasn't very aware of like what I was putting on my skin. But then there might be somebody else that's kind of doing the same thing and they're getting acne from that, even though I wasn't using very good products either. Like, how would you kind of explain that?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I get it often from clients. I hate to be the one to just blame genetics, but it is a thing. Like, if we think about like, why can someone eat a certain way and make certain lifestyle choices with diet and exercise and they never gain weight compared to someone else that does? And that's often a genetic kind of variable that is playing a role there too. Or we're actually just not analysing the details enough to see what else is going on in that person's diet or lifestyle, or this other person's diet and lifestyle. With that, that's where I always think about genetic susceptibility of conditions. For example, for me, my genetic susceptibility, like we heard in the first podcast, was my reproductive system. So whenever I was also really stressed, my period would become delayed. But how come people can not sleep, live this high corporate lifestyle, the periods are bang on, 28 days, no symptoms at all, and really the only explanation that I generally have is genetic susceptibility, that's the thing for that person. For me, reproductive issues were a thing for my mum, and that just kind of then paves that way of, okay, well, maybe this is what is mine. And that's where, when clients come to me with that same question as well, we've always just got to reiterate, well, let's just, that other person's probably also dealing with another condition that you may not physically see, and that's their genetic susceptibility. Maybe their genetic susceptibility is chronic pain or chronic digestive issues, but you don't have that. But unfortunately, it's on your skin and you can see it and other people can see it too.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's so true. Everyone faces different battles, and it's so easy to compare to somebody about your battle, because that feels like it's the worst possible one because that's what you're facing, but then everyone has their own different challenges. Yeah. I feel like even you saying that, I'm just thinking my brain's ticking away. Like, I think my adrenals are
yours is susceptibility.
Like, no matter what I do, every time I get tested, everyone's still like, oh, a bit of adrenal strain. I'm like,
you're like, what else do I need to do?
Yeah,
how much more meditation do I got to
literally, I need to go live in a cave and just like become a monk or something. It's wild.
Oh, but actually, just to expand on that, the other thing that we've also got to think about is, like how you said, during that period of time that you maybe weren't eating as well, or like you weren't using the best kind of skincare. We've also got to think, like, how long was that actually happening? And the person next to you that maybe has acne, has that been something for them that they've been doing for a long period of time? And now the consequence is the skin because of how long, that's been actually going on for as well. So I think they're little things, not to just bring it back to topicals again, but, if someone has been using skincare that's damaging their skin for a very long period of time, their skin's not going to be in a healthy, resilient stage. Whereas if you've been using really good quality skincare and then it's only a couple months that you changed, your history has been good. So we've got to kind of consider the timeline of what actually you've done differently compared to another.
100%. And when I look at my own history, it's like, even though there was, when I was young and I didn't necessarily have that nutritional knowledge yet, like I had already started becoming aware of switching to like more natural. Like I remember using that Sukin brand, like when no one else was really using it, I did become aware of all that stuff. So that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of the audience listening to this episode will be people that are interested in training and go to the gym and do track their macros. So I'd love to dive into, what do you think are the biggest factors in terms of people like that, the dietary choices they're making that are likely impacting their skin that they might not realize?
So a huge thing that I actually see is and I'm not demonizing carbs because we need carbs, but a huge thing that I see is I've actually probably can count a handful of clients that I'm working with at the moment that are going through the same thing. I've got a client that's competing for the world championship for like the Ironman or something like that. And the amount of carbs that she has to eat is quite high. And it's hard to get on top of her skin in the sense that there's also this chronic stress response that's going on, like training 3 to 4 hours a day, the amount of carbs that are going in. But what we can control is the types of foods that are making up those carbohydrates. So that's where I'm always really particular with not just give me your macros and leaving the question at that, but I want to see exactly everything you've eaten for the last week that have gotten you to this amount of carbs, because can we change that so we're not causing blood sugar spikes? That's going to be impacting the same thing, hormones and inflammation and everything as well. So a key thing that I see is the not often that they're not eating enough protein, because usually you don't have to worry about protein intake with people that are tracking or fat. It's often that the foods that they need to eat to reach a certain macronutrient, they're not always choosing the most whole foods based. And that can be things like you're seeing a lot more bagels and rice noodles and like just honey on rice cakes and things like that. And although they're not takeaway foods, they're all still high GI foods. That if that person is susceptible to acne, that's the biggest thing in the diet in the literature related to the diet and acne is high GI foods and dairy. Like those two key elements are important. We then have other things that we have to look at, like their protein powders. Are they having plant-based protein powder or are they having a whey-based protein powder? Because we know that whey increases their sensitivity to insulin as well. And although it gives them protein, is going to exacerbate a hyperinsulinemia picture that might be impacting their skin too. We then need to consider things like, the very convenient protein smoothies you can get from Coles and Woolies now that have 30 grams of protein in a serve. It's a drink full of milk, and some, unless they're sugar-free, full of sugar. And some of them have about 4 teaspoons or more of sugar in them. Yes, they may be training to a high level and they might be chewing through that glucose, but it's still a high sugar load for that person when you're considering everything else that they might be eating in the course of the day. So when it comes to following your macros, I think obviously we've got to make sure you're still fulfilling your nutritional requirements to meet the demands for your training, but we've really got to think, are the foods coming from more whole foods or are they coming from non-whole foods, processed foods?
Yeah. Okay. This opens up a huge conversation because I bet there's a lot of people sitting there being like, but I get too full. If I just eat whole foods, I find it really hard to hit my carb target. So what would be your suggestion to those people?
I think it's about swapping the sources as well. So, instead of going for something that's like a higher GI rice, you're swapping for whole grain basmati rice, which you might have to eat a little bit more compared to some other rices to get the amount of carbs that are in, but you're not taking out a whole food, if that makes sense. I guess the key thing is also then looking at trying to swap things like how you can get certain foods that are much more higher in fiber and so on. They're going to keep you a lot more fuller. It also means maybe chatting to your coach about whether your macros need to change as well to still continue to support your training whilst also trying to support your skin, if that's a huge goal as well. Obviously, depending on if you're like off season or onto like what season you're in is probably going to, impact that as well. But I always like to think like the skin is a true reflection of what the body is requiring internally. And if it's showing you that it doesn't like what you're doing, can your macronutrients actually change? And will you then get a better result with your training if that is changing as well?
Yeah. And I do think the key thing there that we should probably distinguish is that if you're not struggling with your skin and you're eating these like higher GI foods, like cool. But if you are struggling, that's when maybe you need to really look at this.
That's right. And it's all individualized. Like if I have a client that has no issue at all with insulin, no issue at all with their skin, they're trying to get as much food in because they're training, amazing, good, eat as much as you can. But it's always just context dependent with what's going on for them. And the other thing, like in the case that I have with my client that's competing for the Ironman, is we're always kind of bringing it back to her to say, okay, well, what is your goal at the moment? Like, do you really want to clear your skin? Because if you do, we might need to accept the level of how much things can change right now. Or also just change the timeline of some of the goals of what we're aiming for.
Does it help at all in the context of your skin if you were on quite a high carb diet, if you took a more isocaloric approach and made sure you were having fats with any sort of low GI carb and maybe some protein as well? So instead of just rice cakes and honey, maybe you had peanut butter and maybe you had like a can of tuna or some egg whites on the side. Would that make a difference?
Absolutely. Yeah, it would definitely make a difference to the glucose response. I actually find with most of the glucose tracking that I've done with my clients, they get a much better response, and even with myself, a much better response when they're adding more fat to that carbohydrate rather than protein. Like, we obviously want to hit their protein targets and have protein consistently throughout the day, but I often find that the higher the fat intake is with that carbohydrate, the much better the glucose response. And I remember when I was tracking my glucose, I ate this huge bowl of pasta and I was like, oh, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to my glucose. Literally nothing. It did not budge. And because the pasta was made for me, which was really nice, and it had pancetta, which is very high in fat, and had cream in the sauce too. So there was not much protein at all because little pieces of pancetta, how much pancetta can you eat to get 30, 40 grams of protein? But there was a lot of fat in that meal and the glucose did not budge whatsoever. So fat is the huge component of blood sugar dysregulation or blood sugar regulation. And that's where the glucose monitors, like I mentioned in the first podcast, is good because everyone has a very different level of glucose metabolism. So it's helpful to actually see, well, do you need to add X, Y, and Z, or can your body actually handle the banana and it's fine and it doesn't need anything else? I know there's a lot of information that's out there about always pair your fruit with a fat. I've found for myself and with my clients too that they could eat an apple, they could eat a banana and nothing.
Well, it's got the fibre, so that's going to have a similar effect.
Yeah. Whereas the things like, rice or, like we said, the rice cakes and stuff, they will probably need a source of fat in that.
Okay. Let's just quickly touch on the continuous blood glucose monitors because we've brought it up in both podcasts and I'm sure there's people like, how do I get this? Yeah. What do I do with it? So tell people, which brand did you use and like how does it work?
So the brand that I use is called Viverly, and with that you essentially order a monitor. I think they're anywhere between, when they're on sale, it's about $150 to $200 for a fortnight. You put it into your arm and it stays there, it doesn't come out, and it connects to an app on your phone and it essentially tracks your glucose in real time. And it gives you recordings throughout the day of what your glucose is based on the food that you're eating. So, for example, I'll put in 12 o'clock had soup or had chicken and this and that. And what happens is you can see the glucose then rise or you can see it stabilize. And if your glucose response is more than 1.5 after that meal, it's considered a spike. So what it does is it helps to graph all of the different foods that have been classified as causing a spike. And what I do with my clients is I look at their data every few days whilst they've got the monitor in, send them a quick email, give them a quick call. Hey, I saw you just ate this. Do this instead. And then they'll quickly change what they need to try to stabilize their glucose. And that way you can actually see what you might need to do individually with your diet. I found for me, I was having potatoes with lunch, potatoes with dinner, and potatoes every single time I was having it was causing my glucose to spike. That little protein bar that I mentioned in that the other podcast caused a glucose spike. But when I had the same amount of sugar, which was just 4 grams of sugar in the form of a granola, nothing happened because there was 20 grams of fat to stabilize it too. So, yeah, the glucose monitors, helpful. They're 2 weeks that you can wear them or you can purchase multiple monitors. I do believe if you go directly through Viverly, you might get information from dietitians that can give you feedback on that. I do it with my clients and we do our consultations, and then as they wear it, then I just send them email updates or phone calls and stuff just to give them some details. And I've found that to be really helpful, because rather than just saying, here's some high GI foods, here's some low GI foods, I'm actually able to see how much they can tolerate of a particular food. And it also helps me be a little bit nosy and see exactly what they're eating. So I've had a client she is, I think, in her 50s, super lean, eats well, exercises. Once we put her glucose monitor in, we could see how many times she was eating a little bit of chocolate every day, and just that chocolate every day was causing that spike. And she's also on the cusp of probably developing type 2 diabetes, regardless, even though she's metabolically within a healthy weight. So that's been helpful for her, because it's also made her become a lot more aware of the little things she's having in the day that otherwise, when you're doing a standard diet recall, she didn't recall.
Yeah, I am actually super interested in doing it myself. I know I've actually messaged you before about it because I want to learn. I'm obsessed with learning this sort of stuff about my body. So you put the thing in your arm and it stays there for 2 whole weeks. Yeah. Does it hurt when it goes in?
Nah, it's a little pinch and then that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine. My sensors usually only lasted about 12 days before the adhesive started to wear off, and then I just took it out. But you can scan it at any point. It'll tell you what your glucose is, or you can just see it on the graph. And yeah, it breaks down heaps of data to show you like variability of like how often you went out of the norm of what you should. And then that helps me kind of then to see, okay, well, I've only been in the levels of where I need to be in for 70% of the time. This needs to change because it needs to be closer to 90.
Yeah. Cool. So interesting. Definitely going to do that.
Yeah.
You also mentioned dairy. Can you explain how that impacts the skin and drives acne?
Yeah. So one key component when we're thinking about acne is the insulin picture, which we spoke obviously about in the first podcast. But with insulin, what it does is it drives the testosterone production, and testosterone is what increases the sebum production within the skin. Dairy increases or contains a protein that we have, which is called insulin-like growth factor, and that mimics and acts the same as the insulin. And that way, when you've got dairy in the picture, you're exacerbating that whole element of that insulin growth factor. There's also been some research to show that if you have high testosterone, the presence of dairy, whether it's because of the insulin growth factor or whether it's other factors involved, can exacerbate the sensitivity of that testosterone in the skin. So it amplifies the response of the testosterone once it binds to the receptor, and you get an even more increased output of your sebum within the skin. Most of the research is around like cow's milk products. There's not a whole lot around goat's milk products. So for some clients, they're fine with goat's milk products. You'll have some clients that are like, I'm good with yogurt, can't have cheese. Some people that are like, I can't have cheese, but I can have yogurt. The general recommendation, what I tell clients to do is to eliminate dairy for 12 weeks, see how the skin responds. Sometimes they might say, but I've already done that before. I've been dairy-free and nothing changed with my skin. We've also got to think it's never just one factor. And was it like at the same time that they took out dairy, were they also increasing their protein and reducing their sugar intake and using good quality skincare as well? Because that one change of dairy, it's not going to fix everything. It is an important component, but you also need to be ticking other boxes at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. I think as well, sometimes too, people are like, oh, I don't want to cut out dairy. So like any chance they get, they'll be like, no, it wasn't the dairy.
Oh, you know what? You're absolutely right, because people do not care about going gluten-free. You tell them no dairy and you're just, it's like it's crazy just the response that they get, because that also cuts out ice cream and stuff like that. That's also the other element with the dairy, is because if we're not just talking about milk, we're also talking about products that then naturally have high amounts of sugar, like chocolate will have a higher amount of sugar unless it's your darker chocolate. Ice creams that they might be having here and there, instantly there's going to be more sugar. The problem with people when they go dairy-free though is unless I'm educating them, they'll opt for all the dairy alternatives, which is usually soy-based, and then all of a sudden they're having soy milk, soy cheese, soy yogurt, and soy everything They've never had this much soy in their life before. And for some people, the end result is more cystic breakouts, like painful breakouts. So I think the important thing is like don't swap one for one, like dairy for complete soy, and alternate the alternatives. So a little bit of soy, a little bit of almond, a little bit of coconut. So you're getting a little bit of everything rather than everything is now coconut or everything is now almond and everything is now soy.
Yeah, that's great advice. I want to jump to the pill because I know a lot of people get prescribed the pill to fix their acne. So tell us, why is that a solution?
So the pill essentially will slow down your reproductive hormone output because you're shutting that axis off. You're not getting the influence of your hormones on oil production within the skin. Once you come off the pill, that oil flow is coming back unless you did something whilst you're on the pill to try to change that whole profile. So yes, the pill works whilst you're on it, but you have to have a plan if you're on it and you want to come off. So the likelihood of your acne coming back isn't there. So the first thing is we've got to look at making sure all those detoxification pathways are working correctly, because it's not just about what's causing excess hormone production, but why can't those hormones actually leave the body as well? So we think about our detoxification pathways. The gut, are you pooing at least once or twice per day? Do you have a low toxic load on the liver, because the liver is responsible for clearing out your hormones? Are you drinking enough water to filter out your kidneys? Are you moving enough and sweating to be able to actually support your detoxification and your lymphatic system? So all those key things. And are you sleeping? Because obviously sleep is a huge part of detoxification too. All of those elements are what we need to work on before you come off the pill, plus looking at making sure we're correcting the nutritional status. So if you're iron deficient, that's going to impact your collagen production. It's going to impact the detoxification pathways that clear out your estrogen and your testosterone as well. Do you have enough zinc? Because zinc's important for its antibacterial properties in the skin. Is there enough B12? Because B12 supports the development of new healthy skin cells within the skin. So your nutritional status has to be optimal before coming off the pill as well. Then you don't choose the time to come off the pill when you're really stressed. Because imagine the combination of hormones coming back that you haven't had for 10 plus years, because a lot of women are on it for that length of time. And then you've chosen to come off it during peak project time at work or during peak exam time. Stress is through the roof. Hormones are coming back into the picture. And we know stress can impact the oil flow as well. So we choose optimal times to come off. And for me, it's never up to me. It's always up to my clients to decide when that might feel right for them. But I will be the one to tell them if I think they need to wait a little bit longer. But the decision is theirs. So if I can see that they haven't done the things they need to do with their diet, their gut's not working good, they're super stressed, I'd say, look, now is probably not a good time, and just wait until you can work on all of these variables a little bit more.
Yeah, amazing. Again, there's so much that obviously goes into it with nutritional status and lifestyle and all of these things that do impact our skin. I think it's important that you said the pill is really just masking it temporarily, because I do think sometimes people think it's actually a solution. It's actually fixing it, whereas it's not. It's really just masking it if you're not doing that hard work behind the scenes. I want to also ask your thoughts on Roaccutane, because I know that is also another solution that a lot of people will go down that path when they're really struggling to get on top of it. And fairly so, like I understand when it's your skin and it's on your face, like you can't hide it. It really does impact your life and your confidence. But I also know that's a very strong medication with some risks that come along with it as well. So do you want to talk through like what is Roaccutane, like what is it doing in the body and what do we need to be aware of?
Mm-hmm. So Roaccutane basically shuts off your sebum output. So that's why the side effect for a lot of people on Roaccutane is extremely dry skin, dry lips, and dry eyes for some people as well. I actually had a client that was a singer that couldn't sing anymore because it completely just dried up her vocal cords as well. So we think about dry, like mucous membranes everywhere. We've got mucous membranes in our nose, in our digestive system. So wherever there's a mucous membrane, it's getting dry. So that's because of the effect that Roaccutane has on mucous membrane action. It also has a slight action on decreasing your androgens as well. So it also has an element of working on your hormones. And for some women, if they're of an age of potential conception, then they legally have to be co-prescribed the pill at the same time because they're not allowed to conceive while they're on it. If they aren't on it, I'm pretty sure they have to sign a form from the dermatologist saying they've accepted that these are the risks involved. So it basically works on shutting that sebum production down, drying everything out. And then what was the second element of that question? So Roaccutane.
So basically, yeah, what is it? What's it doing in the body, and like what do we need to be aware of?
What do we need to be aware of? Yep.
Yeah.
So the side effects of the dryness, like I was saying, so always making sure you're on good quality essential fatty acids like omega-3. Over-the-counter ones, I generally recommend the Nordic Naturals. Ultimate Omega is a really good one. But also looking at sea buckthorn oil. Sea buckthorn oil is really good internally and externally to try to help with hydration. And of course, at the same time, making sure their topical products aren't anything that's stripping or damaging the skin and it's supporting hydration. The side effects is, one, it can really impact your liver function. So you always have to be repeat testing your liver enzymes to make sure there's no liver damage that's been associated. It can also increase your homocysteine, which is a marker that we look at for a process called methylation in the body. And high homocysteine places you at an increased risk of stroke as well. So that's an important element that we also need to screen for. Roaccutane has also been shown to increase your risk of developing thyroid-related autoimmune diseases as well, and ulcerative colitis, so inflammatory bowel diseases. Whether it's because it's disrupting immune system dysregulation or anything like that, they're key things that we always need to screen for. So if I've got clients on Roaccutane, I'm always making sure that I'm doing a bit of gut work at the same time to protect their gut. I'm always testing their thyroid, and their B12 is a huge one that also becomes depleted when they're on Roaccutane. So with that, it's a little bit different to the pill, because with the pill, people can stop the pill at any point. With Roaccutane, you can't just stop it. You have to wean off it. So you're still working on the same or similar kind of pathways of what you're doing with the pill, like those key elements of what I said before, of everything that we need to work on. But when it comes to the transition off Roaccutane, it's a little bit different, because as they slowly reduce the dose, they'll start to see oil flow come back into the skin. And I think it's important for people to realize that oil flow is normal. It's natural. It's supposed to be there. It's supposed to hydrate the skin. But sometimes if the skin's not particularly ready for it, then that might result in a couple breakouts here and there. And we also have to kind of accept a little bit of a transition as well. It's not always going to come back severe cystic breakouts, but a few little breakouts here and there can often be normal in that transition for a couple months as well. What I do see in some cases is where people have been prescribed Roaccutane when they were young, and what it did is it changed the severity of their breakouts. So maybe before they had really painful, deep cystic breakouts, they've gone on it and they've come off it. Their acne's come back, but the severity of those breakouts aren't as bad, but it's still problematic enough that they need support to correct it. That's one thing that I would say in an element, very lightly beneficial in that sense. But again, they're still going back to those same things that they would have had to do anyway.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I'm hearing in both the last episode and this one is, no matter what you do, nutrition and lifestyle needs to change if you want to result in anything when it comes to your health, basically. So it's never a permanent solution to take a medication or just do one thing. So with the Roaccutane specifically, when someone comes off, obviously there's a chance of like a small rebound, I suppose. How can somebody best support like their overall body health, liver function, skin coming off the Roaccutane?
Mm-hmm. So nutritionally, I'm always often keeping them on like a B complex. So they've got their B12, their folate, and some of those key nutrients for supporting that skin cell turnover. Always making sure that they're working with a corneotherapist for at least 3 months before they're deciding to wean off their Roaccutane. So that's to make sure that their skin is in an optimal hydration state. Now, the reason that I say that that's so important is because the products whilst you're using whilst you're on Roaccutane are like you might say they're not causing any issue or they're making things better, they're not making things worse. But it's hard to tell because you've got all your oil production that's also being slowed down drastically. So it's important that you're getting your skincare changed because the condition of your skin now whilst you're on Roaccutane is not going to be the same skin that you're working with in 3 to 6 months' time when you come off the Roaccutane. So your skincare needs to be supportive of that as well, if that kind of makes sense. It's a different condition you're trying to treat in the skin. Liver function is, of course, like no alcohol whilst you're on the Roaccutane. I often use herbs to try to support the liver, like even milk thistle, or sometimes I use things like glutathione or N-acetylcysteine whilst they're on it as well, just to try to support and maintain liver function, keep the antioxidants up. You can't obviously prescribe vitamin A whilst they're on it, so looking at other antioxidants to just continue to support liver function in that way. But the biggest thing we can do for our liver is reduce the toxins in our environment to try to protect it as well. So no smoking, no drinking, and trying to maintain, a good, healthy, balanced diet.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. When it comes to some of the other skin conditions like the eczema and the psoriasis, there's a genetic component of this, right? Because you said your brothers also, yeah. So there's obviously that. And then what other factors are driving those conditions?
Yep. Oh, I could talk for like an hour and a half, 2 hours just on those two. So I'll keep it brief. Eczema is more of an IgE-mediated condition, which means it's related more to an immune system being triggered from hypersensitivity from the environment. So key thing is, yes, it may be genetics, but what is triggering the genetics? So let's use my brother as an example, very non-compliant person. So he has eczema. He knows he's allergic to dogs and he has 3 dogs.
Oh.
He is allergic to grass and he lives on a farm. So there's certain things that you also need to look at. So with eczema, the unfortunate thing is if you have allergies to things in your diet and your lifestyle, you need to avoid those allergens and you need to be thoroughly tested to see what those allergens are. There's no herbal supplement that will counteract that response. You can take things that are antihistamine and immune modulating to dampen the symptoms, but it won't change the fact that my brother's allergic to dogs, or that someone is allergic to grass. That is where immunotherapy comes in, and that's where people can see dermatologists and specialists to try to do what's it called again? They're like desensitization. So where they try to improve their immune system response to that particular allergen. That is probably one of the key solutions for that element of it. But then there's so many other things that can be controlled without needing to go down that route. And that's things like gut health, looking at screening in any infections that might be contributing to the immune system being triggered, looking at supporting nutritional status as well, keep the skin hydrated. Environment like mold exposure can be a huge trigger for keeping that immune system chronically high and activated. Stress will always exacerbate that response as well. Your water quality. I know whenever I've traveled in different places, if it's different water quality, you see it happen. Like you see in not eczema, but like when I was in London for a couple months, the amount of men that I saw that had rosacea was crazy. Just like could be anywhere, walking the street, I'm like rosacea, just because of the water quality that they have there and just how stripping it can be for the skin. So looking at those variables are important. We then have, that's just very surface level eczema because we could talk for ages on it. Actually, just to add to that, we've also then got to think about fragrances in the home. So body wash, perfumes, deodorants, soaps, everything. We then have psoriasis. Psoriasis is less of that. It's still an overactivity of the immune system response, but it's autoimmune driven in nature. And it is less related to specific allergens that a person has. And that both are triggered by genetics playing a role. Because psoriasis is more autoimmune, we've also got to think of more of the individuals like bacterial and viral load that might be playing a role, and their gut microbiome that can play a significant trigger for that person as well. Topicals are important just as much as like externally with psoriasis as it is with eczema, but it's not a treatment long term for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. It's such a deep topic, isn't it? I think, yeah. And you mentioned how gut health and like potentially having some of those underlying infections like your SIBOs, candidas, how that can really present in a lot of these skin conditions, which I think is so interesting. And we really do need to start internally. I feel like almost each of these topics would need a separate episode. So if we were to just to say like, to women out there that really want to try and support their skin health through their nutrition, what would be like some key things that they need to include?
So skin health in general? Yeah. First, essential fatty acids. So looking at your omega-3, and that's from things like sardine, mackerel, herring, anchovies. They're key for supporting hydration within the skin, but also reducing inflammation. The other element that I would say is important, and it seems so basic, but like eat vegetables. There's so many people just not eating enough veggies, eating enough fruit to be able to support basic nutrient requirements too. The other things that I would say, obviously your water intake. I generally use, I don't know what kind of measure you use for your clients, but I generally kind of go by like a rough 35 to 40 mils per kilo in body weight as like an estimate of how much water someone needs to have, and as minimally processed foods as possible. So anything that you look at within the diet that's a corrective diet for conditions like acne, psoriasis, eczema, the key kind of dietary trends that you see is things like a paleo diet or a Mediterranean diet that works really well. And there's no processed foods that's in that type of diet. It's all whole foods based. So that's a key thing that I would say from a diet point. Like it's always just kind of coming back to as whole foods as you can, and eating enough and not skipping meals, not living off caffeine.
And enough fats.
And enough fats, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so much of this really does start on the inside. I'd love to know, like, if you were to put it into a percentage as to if someone's struggling with their skin health in whatever reason, like what percentage of people should be looking at like internal health versus topical treatments?
Oh, I would say at least, I'd have to be at least somewhere between 90 to 95%.
Yeah,
of people.
It's pretty high. I thought you would say something like that. Yeah, I think like the moral of the story with this podcast is that if you're having any of these issues with your skin, start internally. Like topical still has its place, definitely can explore that too, but I think bringing it back to the internal is always going to be a powerful place to start. All right, well, the last question I want to ask you is going to be a question that I ask all of the guests that come onto this podcast, and it is, what is something that you wish more women knew that could really change their life?
So I think a huge thing is knowing that there's more resources, there's always more resources available to them, regardless of what's going on for them. Because I think the key thing with any stage of life, any conversation I have with someone, when they've had a health concern, the first thing that's come to mind is, oh, there would have been someone else that would have been able to help you with that. I think especially now that I'm pregnant, I'm having a lot of conversations with, family members and friends that have been through the same thing. And, I even had a conversation the other day with someone that was like, I really, really struggled with breastfeeding. And the key thing she said was, I just wish I knew I had more resources that were available to me, because it would have been so different if I had more resources. So I think the key thing that can change any woman's life is knowing you don't have to know everything, but having someone that you can ask, what are my resources available to me that aren't just limited to one medical kind of paradigm, and that there's a whole other area to explore. I think that's quite powerful, because no matter what you go through, whether it's a gut condition, whether it's early menopause, whether it's, infertility, whether it's skin stuff, whether it's difficulty losing weight or anything like that, there's always going to be an option for you. It's just a matter of making sure you can figure out the right resource that's available to you.
Yeah, 100%. And that really starts by, doing some of your own research and having conversations. I think that just opening up a space where women feel like really safe to talk about these conditions and issues that we're having with other people, you start to then tap into new networks of people that can support you and explore these other options. So, I think that's a really good one. So thank you so much, Jacinta. I think there's a lot of powerful information, again, in this podcast. So I will put where people can find you in the show notes if anyone wants to reach out to Jacinta for help with their skin. Jacinta and her clinic all support people and women with skin health and reproductive health every day. So thank you again for joining us on this podcast, and we will see you in the next episode.